Tonight, the tale of 3 orphans in Gaza. Their mother and father reportedly shot dead by Israeli soldiers in their homes. Our investigation comes as Washington ordered an inquiry into civilian deaths. As the children hid in their bedroom, they say soldiers blew up the door and asked them about Hamas tunnels.
They raided our house and they shot our mum and dad. Then they started shooting at us.
The Israeli government are investigating the deaths, 2 of more than 28,000 casualties since the war began. The United Nations humanitarian chief told me the crisis is the worst he's ever seen.
Gaza is, in my experience, the worst is because people can't escape. They're blocked in.
That warning as tensions escalate between Hezbollah and Israel, with 4 people killed by airstrikes and rocket fire. This evening, I'll ask a spokesperson for the Israeli government about the ultimate endgame in this war, and I'll be joined live in the studio by the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. Will Hamas military leader Yahya Sinwar ever be found? And what are the Palestinian authorities' hopes for a lasting ceasefire? Plus, an unlikely bromance, why Johnny Depp thinks Saudi Arabia is in the midst of a cultural revolution. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. I want to begin tonight with a statistic. An estimated 17,000 children have been orphaned in Gaza since October the 7th. Every single one of them has their own devastating story to tell. Tonight, we'll focus on 3 siblings aged 11, 9 and 5. They hid as Israeli soldiers threw a grenade into their house in Khan Yunis and began shooting. They say they were interrogated for hours. By the time the soldiers left, both of their parents were dead. 5-year-old Mumin now has shrapnel lodged in his brain and has been blinded in one eye. His family's story is a tragic one and not at all unique in Gaza. So many children traumatized by the unprecedented levels of violence. Today, more families arrived in Rafah after fleeing fighting around a hospital where they had been sheltering. If Israel has its way, they will soon be forced to flee again, ahead of a military offensive in the southern city. Tonight, I'll ask a spokesman for the Israeli government where they should go. And in a flare-up which could derail attempts at diplomacy, the IDF and Hezbollah have traded deadly rocket fire and airstrikes. We'll assess the threat of regional escalation later in the programme. But let's get started tonight with one family's account of that day in December when soldiers stormed their home.
People in Gaza have been driven into the corners of the enclave. Life now lived in temporary cities erected around functioning hospitals. At the Gaza European Hospital, people camp outside the emergency department because there's not enough room inside, not enough space for the wave of suffering seen and experienced on the Strip. On the second floor, there's a 5-year-old boy who was hit by a grenade. A fragment passed through his eye and lodged in his brain. But that's just part of Mumin's story. His brother and sister watched it all.
It was lunchtime. We were sitting down.
11-year-old Ahmed Hattab was in the kitchen when Israeli soldiers broke into the family home.
They raided our house and they shot our mum and dad. Then they started shooting at us.
His sister, Buthaina, is 9.
We went to another room, hiding from the soldiers. They started banging on the door, and then they blew it up.
In the first week of December, the Israel Defense Forces launched the second phase of their ground invasion in Gaza, targeting the southern city of Khan Yunis. It operates as the headquarters, it said, of senior Hamas leadership. The Israelis deployed thousands of troops and began what they called the most intense battle of the war. 11 members of the Hattab family lived less than 2 kilometers north of the center of Khan Yunis in a suburb called Mahata. Their residence was surrounded by suburban homes, gardens, and grey-roofed greenhouses. The local college lies across the square. The area was consumed by fighting in early December. These pictures show the Hamas Khan Yunis brigade returning fire in the city's northern suburbs. On December 7th, Father Mohammed Hatab called his brother, a doctor, to alert the Red Cross. Their house had been surrounded by Israeli armor. His brother used WhatsApp. He said that the tanks behind the house and excavator destroyed the near house. It's very difficult to move without permission. This is Mohammed's brother, Omar Hatab, a pediatric surgeon at the Gaza European Hospital.
My brother called me and he said, talk to anybody to deliver us from there because it's very difficult. The situation was very difficult. Shots around the house. So I went to Red Cross and talked with them. I was very, very worried.
Increasingly alarmed, Dr. Omar tried the Red Cross the following day. I called my brother and he said, the tanks around the house. Can't move at all. It's complicated. Mohammed's son, Mumin, has cerebral palsy. Moving him is difficult, and they wanted to notify the Israelis in advance. On WhatsApp, the Red Cross was reassuring. Their representative said, we've ensured that the houses would not be bombed or destroyed at night and in the future. Their confidence was badly misplaced. These images were posted by the Israelis in mid-December. We see troops applying overwhelming force in residential areas surrounding the Hatab family's home. On December 15th, IDF soldiers stormed their house. The children's aunt, Dua Hatab, says she was in the kitchen when the troops came in.
They knocked down the front wall and entered the house. We were sitting down having lunch at the time. Then my brother Mohammed was shot. He was at the front, waving a white flag.
A grenade was thrown into the crowded kitchen, injuring Mohammed's wife, Hind. Family members say a soldier then shot and killed her. The device blinded Mumin in his left eye. Israeli soldiers found his brother and sister hiding in the bedroom.
They were interrogating us, asking us to show them the tunnels and to tell them where the resistance fighters were. Then they gave us a white flag and told us to walk down Salahuddin Street.
Their neighborhood had been turned into a war zone. This picture, taken on December 16th, one day after the IDF entered their home. Houses have been destroyed, trees and greenhouses obliterated. The ground chewed up by tank tracks and Israeli earthworks. The local college had been leveled and an IDF base thrust into the district to the north. The surviving family members walked through that battlefield, reaching Gaza European Hospital the following day. Every time the children cried, someone shot at them, they said. Now, Buthaina sits amongst the tents with her colored pencils. Her favorite color? Pink, she says. Both she and brother Ahmed struggle to speak of their ordeal. Their aunt and uncle are busy now, learning to care for their disabled nephew. They say Mumin cries all night. They don't know how to make him happy.
They've lost their father and mother in one day, at the same time in front of their eyes. This is a really difficult thing. No one can cope with this. No one can.
We provided the IDF with a detailed description of timings, events, and coordinates of the Hatab family home. It declined to comment. The Red Cross said responsibility for protecting civilians lies with the parties to the conflict. Robbed of their parents, robbed of their home. 3 orphans in Gaza left to question the incomprehensible. John Sparks, Sky News.
Well, to discuss the situation further with me, joining me now is the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot. Mr. Zomlot, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to first get your reaction to this piece.
It's heart-shattering. And the 19,000 orphans we have now in Gaza, and the sheer trauma of every child in Gaza, every child in Palestine, is really something we have to deal with and deal with very soon. Nothing would shatter a child more than seeing their own parents being murdered, executed in front of their eyes. You're talking about a phenomenon. And many people are still discussing what is the aim of Israel and why Israel is doing what it's doing. The plan is clear. The plan is absolutely clear, to turn Gaza lifeless, unlivable. And after the International Court of Justice has ruled that the crime of genocide is plausible and now Israel is officially on trial, I think we should not be discussing what is happening.
Well, the international community, we're hearing firmer language from the United States, from the UK. France today has said the civilian deaths. Emmanuel Macron has said it's intolerable.
Well, words are not enough. And I think we are worried about the international community. We are really worried about the world. Because Gaza is passing through the worst of times. But I am not sure what will happen next to the rest of us, all of us. Because the normalization of the mass murder of children, the normalization of the mass destruction of houses, 70% of the Gaza housing stock are gone, the normalization of the sheer destruction of an entire community is going to haunt all of us. And the international community is just condemning, concerned. These responsible actors should act rather than declare sympathies.
Well, Mr. Zomlot, behind the scenes, we have seen negotiations take place. The United States, Qatar, Egypt's involved. We're also seeing they're talking to the Israelis. They're all dealing with Hamas. What of the PA? What are your side doing?
We're doing everything we can to stop this carnage. We want an immediate permanent ceasefire. We went to the Security Council first because it's there. It's that order that was established. Security Council is there to prevent wars, to start with. It failed because of the US veto. And then we continued with all our international partners to make sure that A, we stop the carnage, B, we provide the humanitarian aid and the reconstruction, and you know Israel is blocking all that. And C, we want to see accountability, the International Court of Justice, because we have to bring justice to these people, and we have to create deterrence so this is never, ever going to happen again to our children. This should never happen to anyone, including the Palestinian people. And we wanted to see international sanctions so Israel starts listening, because words are not enough. We haven't seen any of this. The international community is sitting on its hands, literally, as genocide is being committed, as the international order and the rules we created together after the Second World War are being demolished. And I think the consequences will affect every single human being on earth.
Mr. Zomlot, will you also urge Hamas to release the hostages, to put an end to this war from their side as well?
I would urge Israel's supporters like the US to pressure Israel to accept the deal by Qatar and by Egypt and by the US, actually, for a hostage exchange.
But what about Hamas's responsibility?
Remember, Israel is a state that harbors terrorism, including arresting people without trial charge.
Mr. Zomlot, I'm just going to push you. I'm going to push you though on Hamas
What's the difference?
What are the PA doing to urge Hamas to release those hostages?
First of all, I represent the state of
I know
Palestine
you do.
and
Yes.
the PLO.
Yes.
And the PLO is very clear on this. There has to be a hostage exchange. Israel has taken, only in the last 4 months, 7,000 Palestinian hostages in its jails without trial or charge. Many of them are children. You know what's the difference between Israel and Hamas in this situation? Israel should act as a responsible state, but it is not. And therefore, yes, there is a deal.
But as a Palestinian, I mean, you know, when you look at this situation that has been brought on, I know you're going to talk about the context before October 7, and I understand that. But from October 7, given the situation has been brought on the Palestinian people, how are you going to urge Hamas and its leadership? There is criticism of Hamas. We saw images of Yahya Sinwar in tunnels. We see Hamas leaders in Qatar, you know, and the Palestinian people are suffering.
Hamas is not part of the political system, of the Palestinian political system. There is Palestinian leadership, there are Palestinian national structures, and we are very clear. Number one, we need to stop this carnage. Israel is targeting our people. It is not targeting Hamas. Israel is eradicating the Palestinian people, the Palestinian children, our schools, education system, our universities. The 12 universities in Gaza, all of them are gone.
Well,
Israel is targeting our health sector, so it is targeting our people. Hostages could be exchanged tomorrow. Israel is blocking that because Netanyahu is not interested in stopping this war. But we, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, are focusing on the L in our name. That is liberation. We need to go back to the root cause of all this. Otherwise, this is a vicious circle. We are waiting for the next tragedy. So we shouldn't just...
Well, we keep hearing about revitalising, you know, the two-state solution, looking at revitalising the Palestinian leadership. But the truth also is the Palestinian people have lost faith in their leadership.
Well, that's up for the Palestinian people, and they have all the legitimacy, and they must choose their leadership and elect their leadership. But this is none of the business of the US or the international community. The business of the international community is to uphold international rules and law and to stop the carnage, and they are complicit. They're not doing so.
Mrs. Umlot, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Let's turn now to the... let's go to breaking news now. I understand we've got some breaking news coming in from Kansas. Let's take you to the situation in Kansas City. At least one person has been killed and at least 10 others injured after shots were fired during the City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade. Police say many of the injured were taken to various hospitals from near where the incident took place, close to Union Station. 3 are believed to be in critical condition, 5 in a serious condition, and 1 person sustaining non-life-threatening injuries. So just an update there on some developing news that's just come in on the situation in Kansas City. At least 1 person has been killed and at least 10 others injured after shots were fired during the City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade. Police say many of the injured were taken to various hospitals from near where the incident took place, close to Union Station. As we've just said, 3 are believed to be in a critical condition, 5 in a serious condition, and 1 person sustaining non-life-threatening injuries. OK, we'll be following those developments there in Kansas City. Now let's go back to the Middle East. Let's turn our attention to the risk of wider regional escalation in the Middle East. Overnight, the IDF said a base in northern Israel was targeted by rockets from Lebanon. The attack killed an Israeli soldier and injured at least 8 others. In retaliation, the Israeli military hit 5 targets today, killing 4 people, including a woman and 2 children, in a village near the Litani River. The increasing cross-border attacks have led to fears of a wider conflict linked to the ongoing war in Gaza. After weeks under siege, civilians were today evacuated from the key Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis as Israel continues to press on with its ground offensive. From Jerusalem, Sky's Diana Magne sent us this report.
Chaos in Adshit, southern Lebanon, after an Israeli airstrike. And here, 20 kilometres to the south, another massive strike. The IDF targeting what they say were Hezbollah military targets in response to rocket attacks from Lebanon into northern Israel. Casualties on both sides, 1 Hezbollah fighter, 1 20-year-old Israeli soldier, and in Lebanon, a woman and her children caught up and killed too. This is a dangerous front, which Israel and Hezbollah keep probing. Tens of thousands are already displaced, and concerns one push too many could trigger full-scale war.
We're in uniform, as you are too when you go home. The job is to think about readiness for war. This is our first task. No one disagrees with us, and we're now focusing on being prepared for war in the north.
In Khan Yunis in Gaza, evacuation from the last place of refuge there, the Nasser hospital. Doctors who have displayed such heroism throughout this war leading the way. And that takes courage. There has been intense fighting all around the hospital for weeks. snipers claiming lives in the hospital forecourt. Gruesome video of one man hit and dragging himself through the hospital doors. Medical workers tentative about collecting him even there, scared to get too close in case they're targeted too. Israel's Prime Minister, though, sticking firm to his hardline stance. It must be Hamas who'll compromise, he says, not him.
This is the key to the release of most of our hostages. Strong military pressure and very firm negotiations. And yes, I insist that Hamas drop their delusional demands. And when they drop these demands, we can move forward.
And so the horrors continue, the displacement and the uncertainty, the fear of the long tomorrow before this nightmare ends. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, stay with me because coming up, the UN's aid chief tells me why the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is unlike anything he's ever seen. Martin Griffiths says the only solution is sitting down and talking with Hamas. I'll put that thought to an Israeli government spokesperson next.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. We're staying with the situation in Gaza now. In a moment, I'll be joined by the Israeli government spokesperson, Eylon Levy. But first, the UN's aid chief has called the humanitarian crisis in Gaza unlike anything he's ever seen. Speaking to me a little earlier, Martin Griffiths stressed that people stuck in the Strip had nowhere to turn.
We're having great difficulty getting aid into Gaza now. If Rafah was attacked and if Rafah closed, it would be even more difficult. We don't think there is anywhere safe for people to move within Gaza. So the idea of evacuating them to some place of safety, we think, is illusory.
Are you saying this to Israeli officials, and what are they saying in response?
We are saying it to Israeli officials. We have, in fact, to their great credit, daily discussions with them in Israel. They are saying, of course, please try and evacuate the people to somewhere else where they may be safe.
Is there clarity as to where that might be, though?
No, not in my view. There aren't any places where you can put your hand on your heart and say, this is a safe place to move. It is also important to note that it is not our choice whether people move or not. It is their choice. They have a right to move. They have a right to decide where to move and where not to move.
I mean, obviously, based on any sort of international law, they have the right to choose where they go, but in reality, they don't.
If you're talking about our role in this, we are not going to participate, as you know, because we've said it publicly often enough, in any forcible movement of people. We will certainly help people if they decide to go somewhere of their own volition and if we think it's safe. But we do not think that there is anywhere safe to go in Gaza.
What is your number one priority now, Mr. Griffiths, when it comes to Gaza? What is the one thing that keeps you up at night? What is the one thing that you want to achieve?
The one thing that keeps me up at night is whether the choice will be made to attack Rafah.
You've been doing this for 5 decades, for the bulk of your life. And you have described the situation in Gaza as the worst humanitarian crisis that you've seen. I mean, that is a sort of a massive statement, given what you've seen throughout your life and career.
Yeah, it's not that I haven't seen terrible atrocities, as you can imagine, in places like Syria. I remember awful scenes that I was obliged to witness and take note of there. It's not as if the Khmer Rouge were not the horrors of their day in my youth. But the reason I said that Gaza is, in my experience, the worst is because people can't escape. They're blocked in.
You've talked about being a mediator, and you've mediated with so many different factions and groups, terrorist organizations over the years that have come to the negotiating table. In terms of Israel's plan to eliminate Hamas and have them never be part of any future negotiation when it comes to Gaza, do you think that's realistic?
I think it's very difficult. And as you say, I've worked with many different terrorist and insurgent groups. Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, of course, as you know, it's a political movement. But I think it's very difficult to dislodge these groups without a negotiated solution, which includes their aspirations. I cannot think of an example offhand of a place where a victory through warfare has succeeded against a well-entrenched group, terrorist or otherwise.
But given the track that Israel is going, the path that Israel is going down, and it has said that without total victory, without the elimination of Hamas, there is no moving forward, there is no day after. How do you think they will stomach something like that?
I think it's very difficult. I have seen the compilation videos of what happened on that awful day of October the 7th. I've seen the horrors of what happened to Israelis on that day. I have met hostage families. I have total understanding, I believe, of the trauma that's caused Israel, and it's widespread in Israel, and I'm not surprised. It's a shocker. But I would add that if you want to have safety and security with people who are going to inevitably continue to be your neighbor in some form or another, you're going to have to create a relationship based on some shared values. And you don't easily do that without dialogue.
Martin Griffiths, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, that was the UN humanitarian chief. Let's speak now to the Israeli government spokesperson, Eylon Levy, who joins me now live from Tel Aviv. Mr. Levy, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. I'm just going to take you back to the beginning of our programme. Our audiences watched an investigation that Sky News did, which included the death of parents of 3 children, where the three children, age 11, 9 and 5, watched their parents killed in front of their very eyes. Then the 2 children say that they were interrogated by the IDF. I just want to get your reaction and response to this.
I've seen that report. It is, of course, very upsetting. I believe that the IDF is currently investigating that incident. I think if true, it's another reminder of the real tragedy that Hamas has brought on the people of the Gaza Strip by launching this needless war with the October 7 massacre and fighting from inside civilian areas. But as I said, I believe that incident is under investigation, and I'm afraid I have no further information.
You're talking about Hamas bringing this on the Palestinian people, and we've just been talking about that on the programme. But this specific case, this was the IDF storming a house, breaking down the door, throwing a grenade in, blinding a child and killing their parents.
As I said, these are the claims. They are being investigated, and I'm afraid I simply have no more information to contribute.
Eylon, these reports are profoundly disturbing, to the point where Israel's staunchest allies are now asking questions about civilian deaths. They say they're investigating, they're condemning, and they're also saying this needs to stop, that the civilian deaths in Gaza are just way too high.
Look, we agree, obviously, that civilian casualties are way too high because everyone who has been killed since October 7th would still be alive if Hamas had not launched this war and if Hamas were not fighting this war from inside densely populated areas. You are falling into Hamas's trap. Hamas's strategy is based on using human shields.
Mr. Levy, I have spoken to retired US generals who are staunchly, stand by Israel's right to defend itself, who have from October 7 said that publicly. But they say they are extremely disturbed by what they're seeing happen right now in Gaza, by these civilian deaths. You say that Hamas has brought this on their people, that they hide behind civilian casualties, they fight from within densely populated areas. These generals have told me how difficult it is, that kind of urban warfare to be conducted. However, surely the IDF is expected to adhere to different standards than Hamas's.
Those US generals know better than anyone else that the war that Israel is fighting now cannot be compared to anything else in terms of the complexity of the urban environment. No army in the history of the world, including the United States, has had to fight against a terror organization that spent 16 years embedding itself under civilian areas, building a tunnel network 1.5 times longer than the London Underground, with shafts inside of homes, schools, hospitals, mosques and kindergartens, holding 134 hostages and firing rockets at the home front.
Mr. Levy, the IDF is expected to adhere to the laws of armed conflict and take all reasonable measures to avoid civilian casualties. They are expected to operate at a different standard to Hamas's.
You are right. And Israel is enforcing those standards, operating in an intensely difficult environment that no army in the history of the world has ever had to deal with.
Oxfam, I'm just going to bring in some stats, because Oxfam says Israel's military is killing Palestinians at an average rate of 250 a day. They've used publicly available data. They've said that they've calculated that the number of average deaths per day for Gaza is higher than any other recent major armed conflict. That includes Syria, Sudan, Iraq, Ukraine, Afghanistan and Yemen.
I want to explain Hamas's strategy to you, because I can see that you are falling into the trap that Hamas has set for you and for the whole global media.
I'm absolutely not falling into any traps. I'm saying that the generals I'm speaking to are saying that they hold the IDF to a higher standard, to a different standard, and surely that is reasonable to believe that.
The IDF is enforcing the principles of international law. in a challenging environment that no army in the history of the world has had to deal with, facing an enemy that is deliberately hiding under civilian areas and an environment in which UN agencies are actively resisting our efforts to evacuate civilians to safety and get them out of places where terrorists are trying to use them as human shields. That is why you see Hamas's tunnel shafts poking out in schools, in homes.
You know, you say this, and yet we've seen Israeli hostages shot dead after they were holding white flags, you know, saying that they were civilians. They were shot dead by the IDF. We've seen reports done by colleagues here in Britain, by ITV, of civilians waving white flags and then being shot dead.
No, Israel is targeting Hamas terrorists. That was indeed a tragic incident with the 3 hostages, and the army was clear that should not have happened. Thankfully, we've been able to get 112 of them out alive, including 2 who were rescued in one of the most daring and successful rescue operation missions in the history of warfare. But you are falling into Hamas's trap.
You're saying that, but I'm telling you that I'm not falling into Hamas's trap. I'm talking about the IDF and the high standards in which the world holds the IDF. That their staunchest allies are now, you know, saying that these civilian casualties, the death toll that we're seeing is unacceptable. You're saying I'm falling into Hamas's trap. I'm telling you that the UK, the US, France, Germany are all saying that the civilian casualties, the death toll is too high.
The United States reaffirmed it is our shared goal to see the defeat of Hamas, because that is the only possible response to the October 7th massacre. It is horrific that civilians are being hurt. None of them would be hurt if Hamas had not launched this war, and if Hamas were not deliberately embedding itself in civilian areas so that the images of humanitarian suffering will play on your nerves and get international pressure to try to force Israel to stop. This is part of Hamas's strategy of sacrificing their own civilians to try to generate international sympathy. And when the international community turns around to Israel and accuses it of being responsible for civilian casualties, instead of pointing the finger at the terror organization that launched this war and is hiding behind them, in fact, like the UN official you just interviewed, who denied that Hamas is a terror organization in the first place, they are telling terror organizations that their strategy of using human shields works, because that will generate international pressure that will force the campaign to stop and leave that terror organization on its feet. And we think that allies and partners around the world that want to see this war come to a swift conclusion, as we all do, should demand one very simple thing. Hamas should surrender. It should lay down its arms, hand over its war criminals for a tribunal, and release the hostages immediately. That, by the way, referring to the previous interview you had with Mr. Griffiths, is what is keeping everyone in this country awake at night.
Mr. Levy, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Now let's digest all of that with our panel this evening. The former Minister of State for the Middle East, Alistair Burt, joins us here. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. And Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Alan, I'll come to you first. I just want to get your reaction. You've been watching the sort of multitude of interviews we've done with Martin Griffiths, with Elon Levy, with Hussam Zumlot, as well as watching our piece. I just want to get your response to what we're seeing unfold at the moment in Gaza and just the entirety of the situation.
Well, the situation's a tragedy. I mean, that much is obvious, and everyone agrees on that. I don't think any of the guests had a disagreement with the idea that a tragedy is unfolding. I think where there is a difference, though, is perhaps what you do to end the tragedy. How do you stop the tragedy from proceeding? And some of the guests seem to think that the way to do that would be for Israel just to stop now and end the conflict. Others thought, well, don't really know the answer. There's just a humanitarian tragedy that's occurring. And others, pointed out clearly that, well, if Hamas gave up the hostages and, turned themselves in, the conflict would end tomorrow. The reality is that I incline towards the latter view in the sense that this war started because of Hamas atrocities. It could end tomorrow if Hamas gave the hostages back and either fled the country or gave themselves up in that way. That, to me, is an easy solution that everyone could get behind.
Alistair, if you could just respond to what we're hearing from Alan, that he's saying, look, this is a military strategy. We're now, 4 months into this and it shouldn't stop.
Alan's right in describing it as a tragedy, as all the people we've spoken to tonight have indicated. But I think the pathway out of this is not through the military action. I've not spoken to, I don't think we've heard from any military strategists who believe that continuing a policy of attacks in Gaza is going to secure the twin objectives of removing Hamas completely and freeing the hostages. And certainly the hostage families in Israel, by all accounts, are also of that opinion. So the thing to be done now is to bring the conflict to an end. It's absolutely right that the hostages should be released. And that should happen.
But bring the conflict to an end through some kind of truce or ceasefire, or sort of continue the military operation?
No, Martin Griffiths is right. These things end through negotiations. The majority of hostages have already been released through negotiations. They have not been released through the extraordinary action that was taken the other day to free the two who were saved. They come through negotiation. And hostage families are terribly concerned that the continuing military activity is going to result in the deaths of the rest of the hostages. All the evidence points to the fact that the negotiations that are currently taking place in Cairo provide the best opportunity for bringing this to an end. A pause...
And yet, the Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying, you know, we want total victory here and an end to Hamas rule in Gaza.
Yes, he's speaking on behalf of the government of the State of Israel. We're entitled to express our view that we don't think he's correct, and there are plenty of other voices who agree the same.
Hang on, Alistair, you surely don't believe Hamas should be allowed to stay in control of Gaza?
I didn't say anything about that. What I said was there has to be a negotiated process to bring this to an end. There are various things put forward as to how this will come to an end. The future of Gaza is one of them. The idea that some Israeli ministers have that the place will be reoccupied by Israeli settlers is as outlandish as believing that Hamas should retain control of Gaza and continue their threat against the State of Israel. Neither of those two situations are remotely feasible for security and justice for the future. But that's all what has to be discussed and decided. It would be better if that was not done on the backs of more civilian deaths. The 17,000 orphans that were mentioned, just to raise that for a second, who are going to look after those children? If it's not their parents, I can think of those who will look after those children and what they will be in 10, 15 or 20 years' time.
I mean,
so
that is
we don't want to see more
pick
of
up
that tragedy.
when we talk about the sort of radicalisation, when you've got 17,000 orphans now, when we talk about, when the Israeli government talks about, when you talk about the eradication of Hamas, and then you hear what Martin Griffiths has to say and says, look, I've done this for 50 years and I've found myself in positions where all sides need to come to the negotiating table. I've dealt with terrorists, insurgents, militia. At the end of the day, my experience tells me they do need to talk to one another.
I don't think it's possible to talk to Hamas. I don't think it is, because Hamas launched essentially a human rights atrocity attack on Israel and has said over time it would do it again. You don't talk to people who want to kill the other side, basically. That doesn't work. Now, I think in reality, Alistair is right that we have to look at what the day after looks like and where we get to. But I think everyone would understand that that would be much easier if Hamas accepted that they had, gone too far. They'd have to leave as a result. By the way, much as Yasser Arafat and the PLO did in 1982 in Lebanon, they left. They left to Tunis. And as a result, that things, moved on.
After 4 months, and a video emerges of Yahya Sinwar roaming around a tunnel, how successful has this operation been?
Oh, no, well, I think that's actually interesting that the video came out, etc., and that he's still scuttling around tunnels.
But that's from October 10, that video. We don't know where he is.
We don't know where he is now, but the reality is he's almost certainly still in Gaza, because we'd no doubt hear about it, otherwise he'd be out of Gaza. The point is he wants to stay in Gaza because he wants to show victory, i.e. I will stay here, and that's going to be the end point. And if he does emerge the day after this conflict, waving a flag, going, you didn't get me, ultimately he's won. And that cannot be a solution for the Palestinian people, for the Israeli people, or for the international community either.
I think one of the problems is that we see victory as a zero-sum game for one side or the other, and it's not likely to happen. Prime Minister Netanyahu desperately needs to continue the conflict because his reputation for security was destroyed completely on October the 7th, and virtually the basis of his premiership over many years was destroyed at the same time. Deliberately making sure there was not a Palestinian state and covertly ensuring that the Palestinian Authority was weakened and Hamas somehow was strengthened in Gaza. All this has come to an end. On the side of Hamas, their dream that Israel will be wiped out from the river to the sea, that is not going to happen either. So you've got two sides, and the polarisation of the position cannot produce an answer which will provide security and justice for the people who we're not speaking about, the Palestinian people and those who have suffered for so long. So that's the work that needs to be done, and Israelis deserve to be secure and safe as well, because October the 7th should never again happen to them.
Is there investment, though, in that? You know, that kind of we keep hearing the rejuvenated situation and revitalising this.
I think there is investment. Remember, the states around Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians, they're now caught up in this conflict, and we've heard more about that tonight. All these states have a vested interest in the sort of Middle East we were beginning to see 6-9 months ago, when states were beginning to talk to each other. Saudis were talking to the Israelis. There was a possibility of a different Middle East. That has been destroyed by October the 7th and what's happened. People want to get that back. So these states are invested because they don't want to see the conflict continue. Many of the states are worried at the support that Hamas has got from their populations because of what's happened. So they have a vested interest in bringing this to an end. So there's a lot of people who do want to see it come to an end. They are investing time. That is why Egypt, principally, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia and others are involved in the talks.
Well, will Israel accept the idea of, OK, well, look, let's just bring a ceasefire to this, bring an end to this and you know, sort of just see what happens?
Well, no, it can't. It can't accept that idea right now in the sense of, oh, let's just stop it right now, just as we wouldn't if we were in a similar position. I mean, there's no doubt that had the UK been attacked in a similar way, there'd be no question of people in this country going, you know what, we must stop now, we'll sort it out afterwards as to what happens, that's how it works. That's not how these things develop.
But then in Rafah, we've got over 1 million people in a very densely populated area, most of them talking to us, a number of them talking to us, saying that, you know, we're waiting here to die.
Well, nobody wants to see that. And that, I think, is why there's been a revitalisation today. I know there was a downgrading of the talks have been upgraded again. The point is that I think most people want to see this conflict resolved without an assault on those people in Rafah, or without them being able to be moved out somewhere. You know, that there is, of course, people are saying there's nowhere for them to move in Gaza. There's a whole country, the other side of the border, called Egypt, where there's plenty of room for them to go. Now, the Egyptians won't let them in, but there are other options that haven't been thought of. And maybe pressure should be put on the Egyptians to say, right, well, if you can't, resolve this situation, you're going to need to open your border and let people through.
Just briefly.
I think the context of the situation, why the people in Gaza are there, how they have been displaced, how Palestinians have been displaced over the years, gives the answer as to why Egypt cannot possibly open its borders, nor the Jordanians either for the Palestinians. They are not going to be complicit in that.
Alistair Burt, Alan Mendoza, thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Let's cross to the United States now, in the state of Missouri, where police are giving an update on the shooting in Kansas City. Let's have a listen in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Quentin Lucas, the mayor of Kansas City. I'm joined today by Police Chief Stacey Graves, our Fire Chief Ross Grendison. After I'm done speaking, Police Chief Graves will give details on the incident that happened earlier today. A few things that I want to make sure we note at the outset. First, today, we had 600 Kansas City, Missouri Police Department officers, 250 from outside agencies. We went out today, like everyone in Kansas City, looking to have a celebration. That celebration was marred by a shooting today. And we recognize that there are some who are injured. We are praying for the safety of everyone. I've talked to a few different folks so far. One, we have spoken to the Kansas City Chiefs, who made clear that their prayers are with everyone who was at the parade today, everyone in Kansas City, and everyone who was touched by this incident. They also noted that their players, coaches, and staff are all accounted for at this point and safe. We, however, note that this is a fluid situation, so all that we are sharing now may change as the hours go ahead. We've also received a call from the White House that offered all federal assistance in the investigation. We had federal agencies present today. We appreciate that, and certainly in the days ahead and the hours ahead, we will make sure we continue to do this work. I will say personally, first, a thank you to the women and men of law enforcement, to the women and men who work with the Kansas City Fire Department and our other agencies. When the shooting started, I, like many others, ran for safety. I saw a number of agencies, including the Kansas City Police Department, officers with guns drawn who were running towards danger. We thank them for that. As I was leaving the scene, I saw members of our Kansas City Fire Department administering aid to folks who are seriously injured without concern for the shootings and the challenges that were near them. This is absolutely a tragedy, the likes of which we would have never expected in Kansas City, and the likes of which we will remember for some time. However, I want to say thank you to those who are making sure that we are safe today, those who are investigating this incident, and those who will continue to make sure that those who committed these acts today are brought to justice. We'll come back for some questions at the end of the chief's comments, but now the police chief, Stacey Graves.
Chief Stacey Graves, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. At the conclusion of the chief's rally today, there were shots fired.
OK, we were listening there to the police giving an update on the shooting in Kansas City. As we've been reporting, at least one person has been killed and at least 10 others injured after shots were fired during the City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade. Police say many of the injured were taken to various hospitals from near where the incident took place, close to Union Station. 3 are believed to be in critical condition, 5 in a serious condition, and 1 person sustaining non-life-threatening injuries. So the police giving an update there on that shooting in Kansas City. As you can see there, the road is blocked. The paramedics and the police have cordoned off the area, and they, as you can see there, someone who is injured is being taken away by the paramedics. So the developing situation there, an update by police. And of course, we will be following all the developments here on Sky News. Now, next tonight, I want to play you this clip, also from the United States, to illustrate how difficult it is to do diplomacy at the moment. 3 ongoing wars, all of them needing financial support from the West. Foreign Secretary David Cameron wrote an article comparing some Republicans to Nazi appeasers in a row over US funding for Ukraine. Let's just hear what happened next.
Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron says that you should vote through funding for Ukraine. What do you say to that?
I think he tried to compare us to Hitler also. And if that's the kind of language he wants to use, I really have nothing to say to him.
Well, he likened you to an appeaser to Hitler in not voting through funding for Ukraine. Are you an appeaser for Putin?
I think that I really don't care what David Cameron has to say. I think that's rude name-calling, and I don't appreciate that type of language. And David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
But do you think Putin's the good guy in all this?
Quite an extraordinary exchange there. Well, let's bring in James, because, of course, another story is also dominating where you are. This one about national security threat. But I'm still trying to process that exchange you've just had.
Yeah, aren't we all, Yalda? I'm happy to report that we have a comment in response from the Foreign Office. They have said within the past half hour, confirming that this is a no comment from us. Clearly trying to draw a line under that. One imagines the kind of diplomatic relationship we will have should Donald Trump win power come the November election. Marjorie Taylor Greene, very much a Trump acolyte. But yeah, you're right, Alda, there is this national security issue brought to the fore by members of the House Intelligence Committee. They have spoken about a serious national security threat related, they say, to a destabilising foreign military capability. They're not saying much beyond that. They're being very cryptic. But our understanding from US officials is that this relates to Russia and specifically its space-related capability. These committee members are calling on the White House to declassify the information so that America and its allies can have an open discussion about this. The White House, for its part, is saying nothing, leaving it to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, to reassure the public at large. He was asked about it by journalists today, and he responded, "Steady hands are at the wheel. We're working on it, and there's no need for alarm." So that's what it stands at the moment. Yalda, precious little detail, but all aggravated, of course, by the background to it all, with Russia an increasingly malevolent adversary.
OK, James, thank you so much for that update. A disturbing situation there. And we are, of course, following all the developments on Sky News throughout the evening about that developing situation, national security threat in the United States. Let's turn now to an unlikely friendship. The Hollywood actor Johnny Depp has reportedly become close friends with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in a domestic violence court case. The pair are said to have bonded over restoring their reputations. I'm joined now by Bradley Hope, who wrote about their budding bromance for Vanity Fair. Bradley, good to see you. Just give us a sense of how unusual this friendship is.
I mean, it's almost hard to imagine that this would be the case. You know, MBS is this world powerful leader that's involved in so many things, and yet he's spending so much of his time. I think we wrote in the article that he spent as much as 7 weeks with him last year, and they have a real connection. You know, so it's one of those kind of hard to believe things that exist in the world.
Yeah, I guess, you know, it's not totally unlikely. We have seen these sorts of friendships take place before. And I guess in many ways, it's sort of the chance for a certain state to almost like revamp their brand.
Well, I think, you know, Saudi Arabia is really investing a huge amount of money into becoming an entertainment destination. So if you film a movie in Saudi Arabia, the rebates that are offered to filmmakers are some of the best in the world. And there's a huge influx of Hollywood producers, actors. And so it's not surprising in that sense, because obviously this, you know, during a time when there's entertainment downturn, Saudi Arabia is investing in film and willing to invest in Johnny Depp's films as well.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. As always, so much to talk about, and we always run out of time. That's it for tonight. Thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow at 9. News at 10 is up next.